Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video, and today Nvidia just released the dynamic frame generation up to 6 times FG. Previously we got multi-frame generation 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. We're all used to it at this point. Well, those of you who have 50 series GPUs or watch my videos. But now there's this new dynamic setting. If you go to the Nvidia app and use the beta branch over here, okay, opt in to access beta experimental features. If you go to the settings of a game here and select the frame generation mode down here, you can see this dynamic button right there. You click it and now you can target your maximum refresh rate. In this case, I'm using a 240 Hz display at 4K resolution and up to 6 times frame generation. So this is pretty interesting. You can also choose up to 3 times, up to 4 times, or up to 5 times. But I want to check out the 6 times FG here and 5 times as well, because these are basically new. Well, since we're here in the Nvidia app, I will also go over a couple of things. I will apply this first. I'm also going to override the model preset here with DLSS 4.5, preset M. There we go. And I was thinking of covering like Crimson Desert in this video as well, but as you can see, the dynamic setting is actually grayed out, so it's not going to work in all of the games that support frame generation already, alright? So it's a bit a hit or a miss. I hope they work on supporting more games in the future. Also, if you're wondering, no, we can't visit Jack in this one because GTA 5 Enhanced also doesn't support it. Let's get to it, shall we? And here we go. We got dynamic 6 times frame generation running right now, guys. Sometimes it will go down to 5 times, as you can see right there on the top of the screen. This is buttery smooth. Holy crap, guys. So it changes between 5 times and 6 times over here with the path tracing enabled and the settings that we're utilizing, performance DLSS and so on, ray reconstruction. Things are very, very intensive for the RTX 5080. If I disable the frame generation, you'll see that we're getting around 50 to 60 frames per second baseline FPS, you know. So of course it will require a big amount of frame generation, 5 times, 6 times, 4 times, to achieve those 240 frames per second. That's exactly what we're seeing here. In terms of latency, by the way, it's pretty low, actually, for what it is. I thought 6 times would deliver a ton of latency, you know, since we're seeing 5 AI-generated frames in between of every normally generated frame, you know, rendered frame, whatever. So, yeah, this is quite a surprise to see 50, 60 milliseconds of input lag. You can actually notice that compared to FG disabled, but in my opinion, in a game like Cyberpunk at least, even with its first-person aspect, it doesn't really matter too much, honestly. Like, I can play the game absolutely fine here. Yes, I won't be as accurate as I would be with real 240 frames per second, but that's basically impossible to get with path tracing enabled anyways. Oh boy. Okay, I need to reload. Let's just get out of here. We killed Bob already, so that's fine. Okay, so it starts dropping a little bit sometimes into the 230s, which is actually good in a way, because this way, if you have a G-Sync monitor with 240 Hz, you are within the G-Sync range most of the time. Sometimes it goes above it, as you can see though, so you can see some screen tearing when that happens. But yeah, most of the time it's 230s, 240s, 6 times FG. It actually works pretty well. What does bother me a little bit is, first of all, these policemen coming after me while I'm doing a benchmark video. I mean, I just killed Bob. You're targeting me because I killed Bob. Are you serious? Like, this is stupid. There we go. See, I'm able to play this with 5 times or 6 times FG. This is crazy. But there are issues, my friends. First of all, yeah, the latency is impressive, but it's there and it's noticeable. Second of all, there is quite a lot of artifacting, okay? Now that I'm starting to look at it closely, below the car and behind the car, actually, that looks a little bit weird, actually. Sometimes when subtitles come on screen, you will be able to see a little bit of ghosting with 6 times FG enabled. That's something that I noticed yesterday with 240 Hz. Today, I'm playing with 120 Hz because I got the capture cards rolling to capture our on-screen display there on the top of the screen. And yesterday, I recorded this entire video with shadow play, thinking, yeah, this is much smoother. This is going to allow me to see all of those frames and to see the perfections and to see the 240 FPS, you know, instead of being capped to 120. but then it didn't record the on-screen display. Like, I was seeing it on screen, but Shadowplay apparently doesn't record it, so yeah, I was pretty mad. I spent 2 hours playing games with this and recording my reactions. First impressions as well. Like, these aren't first impressions anymore. Okay, what the heck? Oh, I'm dead. All right. But moving on, my friends. Today's a new day, and I am not mad at myself anymore. And I'm recording here with a capture card with the usual setup. Oh yes, that's another thing. I built an entire setup just to record it with Shadowplay, and then it didn't work. That's the life of a YouTuber. Sometimes. Anyway, guys, this is definitely playable. Would I choose to play like this? Probably not, because of the amount of artifacting that I'm seeing. It's not too big. It's not like unplayable, you know. But if you're driving really fast, you can start noticing some ghosting and some weird issues, especially on these crosswalks, for example. Well, that wasn't really that noticeable. Honestly, I'm having a bit of trouble. Okay, there we go. We can actually see the ghosting on the subtitles there. And that actually happens for everything on the road below the car or behind the car there. So that can be a little bit annoying. I can see how some people will be put off by that, and myself included. All right, I want to showcase something. I want to try and drop it to 4x FG by looking at this guy. There we go. Yeah, so this is less intensive, obviously. There's a lot less to render if you're looking at the sky. Or is there more to render? Because we're seeing the entire universe here with the stars and everything. But yeah, guys, it is 4x frame generation because the baseline FPS now increased a lot. And it only needs to use 4x FG to achieve our target frame rate. If I disable the frame generation right here, yes, it says that it needs to restart, but it actually doesn't need to restart to stop the frame generation stuff. Yeah, you can see it goes down to dynamic 1x, so it's not using FG right now, and we're getting 94 FPS instead of the 50s and 60s that we see down here. Basically, what I'm seeing here is when you are between 60 and 70 frames per second, it tends to use 5x FG to achieve 240 FPS. Remember that it's not scaling like linearly. 5 times equals 5 times 50 FPS. It's not like that because FG itself is also a little bit intensive and drops your internal FPS or the native FPS, you know. And if you're getting 50 to 60 FPS or less than 50 FPS as well, it will just use dynamic 6x frame generation and give you the most or the biggest amount of ghosting. Obviously over here we don't see any artifacting, but this is a worse experience, all right? Even though we're getting 60 FPS sometimes, down into the 50s at times, I think I would choose to play with frame generation instead of this, all right? It's just a little bit worse, you know? And in terms of latency, it's higher. Right now, it's higher for some reason. Okay, we're getting 91 milliseconds of input latency without frame generation at all. I think that's because, yeah, it's disabled reflex here. Let's enable it again. So with reflex and 60 frames per second, or 58, whatever, we're getting 56 milliseconds, 57, around 50 to 55 milliseconds there, as you can see. And once we enable the frame generation here, dynamic one, which will be around 5 times, I think, given the FPS that we were getting. Yeah, there we go, 5 times frame generation. This is lower. The input latency is 45 to 50 milliseconds, even with reflex enabled. Like, this is crazy, actually. I did not expect that. This is something that I didn't try yesterday. Okay, so theoretically, your input latency is going to be lower. Can I still notice a difference between real 200 plus FPS and the frame generation 5 times 200 plus FPS? Yes, I obviously can tell a big difference here. Dynamic 6 times right there, entering the car, so it gets a little bit more intensive here. Let's go third person here. There we go. Yeah, there is a big difference there. You will see a lot lower input lag with real 240 or 230 frames per second, around like 15, maybe 20 milliseconds, even lower than that. So if you compare that to this, obviously this will have a huge amount of input lag added to it. But if you compare this to the 60 FPS that we were seeing, input lag stays roughly the same, yet we are now getting 200 plus FPS smoothness. And this is crazy. Although, once again, quite a lot of artifacting is noticeable, especially when it says dynamic 6x frame generation right there. That little stutter was just an autosave, by the way. But yeah, it's usable for sure, and it's impressive, but I think you should aim for like 3 times or 4 times frame generation maximum while having the dynamic stuff enabled to achieve 6 times dynamic in extreme situations, like big explosions happening on screen that will drop your FPS like crazy for a second or two, basically. That's where dynamic frame generation 6 times comes in handy, not to play the game like this. Again, it is doable. Some people might not even notice the artifacting, but I find it hard to believe, okay? Like, most people will definitely notice the artifacting here. So we got a couple of options now to make it better. We can either lower the graphics quality to achieve the same target FPS with the dynamic FG being a little bit lower with 4 times or 3 times. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So instead of using Ray Tracing Overdrive, I'm going to drop it down to Ray Tracing Ultra, which is still very good looking, of course. Not as impressive as Path Tracing, but still. Ray Reconstruction, I'll enable that still, and I will disable these options again. So this is the Ray Tracing Ultra preset, which drops our frame generation override to dynamic 4 times. Still looking fantastic. Little bit less artifacty for sure, and now this is actually good, because for 4 times frame generation I usually say that you need 200 plus FPS with the FG enabled to notice very few amounts of artifacting, and this is exactly what we're getting here. If I disable the frame generation, you can see that our baseline FPS is now around 90 frames per second, 80 to 90 frames per second. So, whereas this would be a pretty stable, pretty good experience already, you know, like, we're getting 80-ish FPS, real FPS, there's no frame generation going on right now, latency is pretty low as well because of it. I would still probably not choose this experience. I can see a lot of people that hate frame generation and stuff like that thinking, yeah, I would definitely play like this because the game looks amazing right now, especially with that ray reconstruction, performance DLSS 4. It's awesome. This looks 4K to my eyes, even though it's 1080p being upscaled. Look at those reflections on top of the car as well. Accurate reflections, looking beautiful, super sharp as well. Yeah, I got 0 issues with the graphics right now, but we can have this graphics with a smoother experience by using frame generation, so why not use that, especially if you're running a high refresh rate monitor, right? And now with the 4 times FG, since the baseline FPS were around 90 frames per second, oh my gosh, it actually works really well. It's super stable, latency is lower than it was with 6 times and the lower baseline FPS, of course. It all comes down to the baseline FPS that you're getting. That's why I'm not testing this with a 5090, because the baseline would be a lot higher. We would not be able to achieve 5 times and 6 times as often and test that out, you know. But here, yeah, 4 times. It seems to be stable at 4 times FG. Artifacting is non-existent, almost. Like, I can't really notice anything wrong with the picture right now, honestly. And the good thing is, and what dynamic frame generation does and adds to the experience is, you know that if there's a huge explosion, a super demanding cutscene and stuff like that happening on screen that will drop your baseline FPS by a lot from like 90 to 60, the frame generation will just adjust dynamically and use like 5 times and 6 times in those occasions. And then you're never going to drop from like 230 frames per second. It's just, yeah, it's the butteriest, smoothest experience that you can have in a game, basically. Although, when it starts using 5 times and 6 times, it starts looking a little bit worse because of the artifacting, at least when targeting 240 frames per second. If you're targeting like 300 or 400 FPS, for example, with dynamic 6 times frame generation, and you have a baseline of like 120 frames per second, the same thing that we're seeing right now applies in that case, which is higher baseline FPS makes it so the artifacting isn't as noticeable. Yeah, this works really well. It's pretty snappy. I can enjoy the game like this. I would probably enjoy the game like this, honestly. Or if you must have path tracing enabled, because, you know, a lot of people just want to have the highest visual fidelity possible in their game, well, let's go back to path tracing here. Leave that frame generation on. This is obviously going to give us 6 times FG. Oh my god, so much motion blur. So what can you do if you want to use path tracing but you're uncomfortable with the amount of artifacting that you're seeing? Well, you go to the Nvidia app over here and change this, the target FPS right here. You can actually leave this up to 6 times, you know, whatever you want, but let's target 120 frames per second instead. All right, that should give us around 3 times FG with a baseline of 50 FPS, maybe even 2 times sometimes in some areas that are less intensive. So let's try that out. And now we're having really good smoothness, in my opinion. It's actually not going up to 120 somehow. I thought it would. And it would use like 3 times, but I'm actually more comfortable with 2 times. And I guess this is actually the perfect experience for me, guys. I usually say 90 FPS experiences in these single-player titles are underrated. It's 50% smoother than 60 FPS, which a lot of people are comfortable with, alright? So it's a lot smoother, basically, than 60 FPS with around these FPS that we're getting right now. And at the same time, you get really low amounts of artifacting. I can't even notice it. Again, remember that our baseline FPS were around 50 to 60 frames per second, and now we're using dynamic FG up to 6 times. So if something crazy happens and your FPS drops to like 20, the internal FPS drop to like 20, literally, it will use 6 times FG. It's a really nice experience, very low amounts, 3 times FG there, so it got a little bit more intensive and 3 times kicked in, and now we're at 140 frames per second. So, depending on whether it chooses 3 times or 2 times, you can have a vastly different experience, actually, because from 100 FPS or 90s, to 150 FPS sometimes, or 140s most of the time, there is quite a bit of a difference. And right now we're doing exactly the same thing, but it's ticked to 3 times FPS, or 3 times frame generation. That's weird. Maybe the perfect target FPS is like 144. This way you can stick to 3 times frame generation most of the time, which doesn't give you a lot of artifacting whatsoever, and in less intensive areas, you'll drop down to 2 times FG. In more intensive areas, it goes up to like 4 times, 5 times, and that's it. Yeah, there we go. 3 times frame generation right now. Latency is pretty low still. Artifacting is negligible at the moment. Do I notice something? Maybe. Yeah, maybe on the back of the car I can still notice a little tiny bit of artifacting, but it doesn't really bother me too much. And now we have the smoothness of 144 frames per second, or 130 plus basically, with 3 times FG, kind of locked. But again, you know that if you go to a less intensive area, look at the sky for example, it will likely drop down to 2 times. Come on, let's look directly at the sky then. 2 times, there we go, 160 FPS there, with 2 times FG, and in more intensive areas like more intensive cutscenes, some vegetation areas for example, it will likely increase to 4 times. But yeah, this feels very comfortable, guys. And when was the last time that you saw someone complaining about 130 or 140 FPS smoothness in a game like Cyberpunk? I get that in CS2, for example, Overwatch and stuff like that, competitive shooters, it matters, having like 200 plus FPS, really low 1% lows as well, maybe even 300 FPS, it matters. It can make a difference, especially in terms of latency and stuff. But in a game like Cyberpunk, single player, doesn't matter too much. Now, want to see something crazy before we go to the next game, guys? I think I've tested everything that was to test here in Cyberpunk, but my inner thoughts are killing me right now. So we're basically targeting 144 frames per second. What if we lock it to like, I'm not going to do 10, but what if we lock it to 30 inside of the game? Dynamic FG will kick in. Oh, look at that. To try and put us... Oh my god, this is actually crazy. To try and put us at that 144 FPS mark. What the hell? Like, the latency isn't even that bad. I thought it was going to be terrible and completely awful, like unplayable, but this is 150 FPS coming from 30 baseline. All right. Holy crap, this is actually crazy, guys. I can see a ton of artifacting. Look at the behind the car there. I mean, sometimes you might think that those are reflections on the road, but it's just artifacting, all right? Oh boy, yeah, there's a lot of warping, but this is crazy, dude. Like, I really did not expect this. Now, I'm gonna drop it to 10. 10 real FPS right now, okay? Obviously, it will use dynamic FG 6 times, and that's only to achieve around 60 frames per second. The game is actually in slow motion at the moment. My inputs are super delayed. We're getting latency of 200 plus milliseconds after all. The artifacting is the worst that I've ever seen. Like, not even joking. This is worse than everything that I've ever seen. But it's kind of crazy still that it feels so smooth. It looks really smooth, right? These are real 10 frames per second. But this is awesome, isn't it? I might actually make a video only testing this stuff in other games. Damn. All right, but that's it for Cyberpunk 2077. Now you know what you can do, what the limitations of this technology are, and that it basically improves your smoothness in, like, worst case scenario experiences, you know. It makes it be more stable across the board and get you that target FPS, or at least as close to that target FPS as possible all of the time in your gameplay, no matter the scenario. All right, next up, I really wanted to try Crimson Desert. Does it work today? No, it's still... yeah. What about Resident Evil? Does it work today? No. Okay, never mind. So let's do a first-person shooter. By the way, Nvidia, if you're watching this, can you give us a way to search for a game? Like right here, you just type a game's name and it will show up, because I got a ton of games installed and it's hard to find them sometimes. Anyway, let's try Gray Zone Warfare in the next one. I'm gonna use the dynamic frame generation, of course, with 240 frames per second. Let's target that first. Super resolution is set to preset M, so it's DLSS 4.5 that we're gonna utilize here. Alright, here we go, guys. In this one, I'm at 4K resolution, utilizing epic settings. By the way, I can see the warping over here and artifacting, basically, even in the menu. So this game doesn't seem to have the best implementation of frame generation, really. DLSS set to performance as well, and it's DLSS 4.5 preset M instead of 4.0 in this one that we're utilizing right now. And this is good for 4 times frame generation there. This is totally fine in my opinion. It looks good as well. Pretty sharp. A little bit too sharp for my taste. That's just DLSS 4.5, I guess. Yeah, on performance, you still have a bunch of detail here. It looks great. I would be completely fine playing like this. Latency is at around 40 milliseconds, which is fine for a game like this. It is like a slower-paced first-person shooter. But obviously, if you want to be competitive in this game and play PvP and stuff and have that competitive edge, you'll want to probably play at like low settings without frame generation to achieve the maximum possible FPS. I'm hearing a lot of people shooting at each other, I think. Maybe another agent like us. I'm playing PvE, so should be fine here. Nobody should kill us unless I suck and die to the bots, basically. But yeah, this is fine. 4 times frame generation. It's not anything that I haven't seen before, but again, you already know, if it becomes a little bit more intensive, it will kick in the 5 times frame generation and then stay as smooth as it is right now. Or if, on the other hand, it gets less intensive, for example, inside of a house, I'm actually gonna go there right now, inside of this one, if I can. I believe we could actually get in here previously. Why can't we anymore? Okay, maybe we need to destroy the doors? I don't know. I'm gonna go inside of this one then. Should be less intensive, like looking at things, looting stuff. Where is the 3 times frame generation kicking in? Come on! Looking at the sky, it does it. 3 times FG. I guess it's still not enough baseline FPS inside of houses like this to put us on 3 times. But 4 times works pretty well. What about no frame generation? What kind of latencies do we get there? So it's around 40 milliseconds with FG enabled. And if we disable the frame generation, we get pretty much the same. So do you prefer getting 80 FPS with 40 milliseconds of input latency, or do you prefer getting 240 FPS with 40 milliseconds of input latency? I don't know if it's placebo. I think this feels a little bit snappier still. And let's enable frame generation. We get the same amount of latency, like 2 milliseconds or 3 milliseconds higher. Now that actually might be the same. Yeah, in terms of snappiness, it was just placebo, guys. All right. However, again, guys, there is a little bit of an issue. I don't have a flashlight in this one. But yesterday, when I was recording with Shadowplay, and it didn't record my on-screen display on the top, so I'm recording this entire thing all over again today. Well, yesterday, there's a guy there. Hi. It was nighttime, and I had a flashlight on me, or at least my gun had a flashlight. And it was absolutely terrible in terms of artifacting. I think the frame gen didn't know what to do because everything was dark around the little circle, the flashlight circle, right? And it couldn't really predict what I was going to look at, so it was just warping all over the place. That image was awful. And that was with 6 times because I started with quality DLSS. Let's try it with quality DLSS. All right, it's now 6 times FG. Okay, so this, the finer leaves, I can see them blending in like they do in Crimson Desert, even without DLSS or frame generation. That game is just so bad in terms of picture clarity, you know. Obviously, zooming in like this, I can see a bunch of artifacting as well. But again, you're not really supposed to play games at 5x or 6x all of the time, frame generation, that is. Like we are right now. This is just to showcase the worst case scenario in terms of ghosting and artifacting from frame generation. And right now it's getting 5 times, but yeah, I can notice a bunch of things wrong with the image. It's not super bad like it was yesterday with that flashlight that I was telling you about. That was the worst. But during daytime, guys, even 5 times frame gen or 6 times frame gen is actually super doable in my opinion. It looks good, it looks sharp and detailed with DLSS 4.5 as well. I don't see many things wrong with the picture here, aside from blending in of some of the grass leaves with the higher amounts of frame generation. With 4 times, there was no blending in whatsoever, so I think I would still drop this down to performance DLSS, which looked pretty good still. And play with 4 times most of the time, 3 times in least intensive scenarios, and then 5 times, 6 times in extreme situations like possibly explosions and stuff. But yeah, that's it for Gray Zone Warfare. Just wanted to showcase a first-person multiplayer shooter here. Get a feel for the latency in this type of game, you know, and it's actually pretty damn good. Also, another thing, guys, if you're wondering about Arc Raiders, I installed it in the middle of recording the other video yesterday because I didn't have it installed for some reason, and this one also doesn't support dynamic frame generation at the moment. I was really happy to see this uninstalled. I thought, yes, we're gonna include Arc Raiders, super popular title, multiplayer and stuff, and then I installed it and I just wasted more time basically there installing the game, but it's fine, guys, because we're now going to Alan Wake 2. Dynamic frame generation up to 6 times. Let's do 240 FPS there to target. And this is a game where you don't really need 240 FPS at all. You could say that in Cyberpunk it kind of makes sense because, by the way, DLSS preset M 4.5. Because sometimes there is like the first-person aspect. It is actually fast-paced at times. Alan Wake 2 really isn't. And well, guys, here we have it. We got dynamic frame generation 6 times running right now with the highest latency that we've seen so far. I can definitely notice it, but again, it's Alan Wake 2, and it's slow-paced, and it doesn't bother me quite as much as it did in the other games. And we're here at 4K using DLSS performance, internal resolution of 1080p. Frame gen is on, high settings preset with the high ray tracing preset as well, which has path traced lighting, or indirect lighting there on high. Very intensive stuff, that's why it needs 6 times frame generation. And in this one, I was really impressed, because at a first glance, there is no artifacting. It looks amazing right now. Even turning the camera around like this really fast, I mean, it looks great, honestly. It's only when you start paying a close attention to things like the hair on the character there. Look at it. There is definitely some weird halo effect around there, and if I move things around like this, yeah, it kind of falls apart a little bit with all of the noise and stuff. But if you're just playing the game, for example, with a controller, where you can't really do this very often, it's actually usable with 6 times frame generation, which I wasn't really expecting here in Alan Wake 2, because it has a lot of vegetation and stuff like that, which looks great, even with 6 times FG. It doesn't warp or anything. I guess the lack of wind also helps it a little bit because, well, things are just static. I guess this game being a bit darker as well. I have my flashlight enabled, by the way. Look at that. But it's so dim. But this game being a bit darker in these areas, at least that I'm testing in, because these are more intensive, it helps mask some of the artifacting, and that's probably why we can't really see a ton of it right now. But yeah, even if you want to use 6 times dynamic frame generation without it being dynamic, because you're never really achieving the 240 FPS, so it's kept to 6 times FG all of the time, it's usable. It will feel buttery smooth, and it will have a lot of latency, but it, again, in my opinion, in this game, doesn't really matter all that much. Now, this is where I wanted to compare it a little bit with the Gray Zone Warfare, because you saw that clip during nighttime in Gray Zone Warfare. It got absolutely wrecked with the frame gen on 6 times in terms of artifacting, because it didn't really see other things around the flashlight. And here, this is also a very dark area with a bright flashlight. And even in these... What the heck am I hearing? Someone's talking to me. Even this wall here with this wood, you know, and these lines, it doesn't warp or anything. I think it's just getting screen tearing because, again, of the capture card. But I'm not seeing any obvious artifacting. This is decent. So that's pretty impressive. I just wanted to showcase that here in Alan Wake 2. You shouldn't really play with 6 times all of the time, once again, but if you wanted to, well, there's the option to do so, and it's not half bad, okay? But let's try it with, like, ray tracing turned off here, since RT is so damn demanding in this game. It's still intensive without ray tracing, though, but this gives us that nice starting point, or that nice average of 4 times or 3 times frame generation most of the time. I guess in the city area, since it's less intensive than this, you're gonna see, like, 3 times a little bit more often. Over here, out in the woods, you're gonna see 4 times, but since it was so hard to notice the artifacting with 6 times, with 4 times, well, good luck to you. It's not going to be that noticeable. Look at this, 3 times right here. It's not as intensive in this area. It still looks awesome, even the lighting and stuff, without the ray tracing. And now, if I do this, there is a lot less artifacting around the hair of the character here. Works great, guys. 3 times FG there. Yeah, this... I think this is a better experience, for sure. It also cuts our latency in literally half, all right? So if you're playing with mouse and keyboard, this is way more responsive like this. It's really, really good. And again, that's not because we went from 6 times FG to 3 times FG. That's just because we were playing with a baseline of around 40 FPS previously, and now we're playing with a baseline of probably around 90, I guess. That's what we've seen in Cyberpunk. Yep, 90 to 100, exactly. See that? So it uses 3 times whenever the baseline FPS is on 90, basically, to achieve 240. There are a ton of variations, of course, once again. that you can do in this one. You could target like 165 FPS, for example, which I haven't tested here in this video. You could target 300 FPS, which I also haven't tested, but there are tons of different options with this multi-frame generation stuff. Now, in a game like Alan Wake 2, I really don't see the point of using 240 Hz or 240 FPS here because, again, it's slow-paced, single-player. I would be fine with 90 FPS. I'm not going to target 90, I'm going to target 120 instead, because that's considerably smoother than 90. But yeah, let's try it out with like 120 frames per second. And wow, so it's actually inactive right now. What?
I'm going to go check something out.
I have not seen it be inactive so far. What if we try high ray tracing again? Okay, now it's not inactive. So it wasn't using frame generation at first because it was close enough, or at least it considered it close enough to 120 frames per second to where it didn't really use it. But now with ray tracing enabled, we're using 3 times dynamic frame generation on top of this. Ray tracing high, of course. Latency is back to a very high value, not as much as previously because, well, dynamic 3x is lower than 6x, obviously. So the latency does drop slightly, like 10 milliseconds. Sometimes it still goes up to 80 milliseconds. I guess it just depends on where you are. So now you can have that stable-ish 120 frames per second to 140 sometimes, and it will adjust dynamically. It shouldn't really drop from 100 FPS. You should have a pretty good experience in more intensive areas. I'm not sure if it gets more intensive than this, honestly, because again, this area, I chose this area not only because it was the initial part of the game, okay, and I am lazy, so I didn't play it through to see more intensive areas. No, I actually did play it through a little bit more than this, and this is by far one of the most intensive areas. It has a ton of vegetation, super demanding here, so it shouldn't really drop much from this, no matter what you do or what part of the game you're in. Now, this still goes up from the high ray tracing. There's ultra ray tracing here, which is even more demanding. Can we use that and keep the 3 times FG? Yes, we can. Look at that. So this is where this dynamic frame generation stuff also helps this a little bit. The artifacting that we're seeing right now is basically the same as it was previously, without the ultra setting, path tracing setting. Playing the game, running around, it's not going to be that noticeable, honestly. And we're keeping around the same frame rates and the same latencies. It's very similar experience, but now we got that ultra setting enabled. So yeah, you can also play around with settings like this and see if the dynamic 3x changes or the value changes there. And if it doesn't change, you could possibly get by with a similar experience and slightly higher settings as well. I'm curious, what kind of FPS would we get with it turned off, with the frame gen turned off? It's around 50 FPS, 45, 50s, 40 to 50 most of the time. Latency is pretty much the same, as you can see. So you're getting 40 to 50 FPS latency with 120 FPS smoothness. That's what that means. You're not getting real 120 FPS. It won't feel as snappy as real 120 FPS, far from it. But it will look as smooth as 120 FPS with a little bit of artifacting. And it will be playable still. So that's it for Alan Wake 2. Pretty good stuff. Dynamic FG works really well here in this one as well. It's these kinds of games where it will work the best. You know, single-player games where latency doesn't matter too much and that are pretty stable when it comes to the frame generation experience. Pretty good FG implementations. Time for Hogwarts Legacy, guys. I'm gonna play this one using a target of 240 FPS, which shouldn't be too hard to get because the game is based on UE4. It's not as intensive as, say, Grey Zone Warfare. and up to 6 times FG still. Over in this one, we're playing at 4K using DLSS performance. Dynamic frame gen is enabled. This one actually gives us a mode, DLSS G mode X6, X5 over here. That's very interesting. No matter what you do, we're overriding this in the Nvidia app, so it's using dynamic FG up to 6 times. But I guess if you don't have it enabled in the Nvidia app, it will probably work just by using this or selecting this. On the settings presets, we're using ultra settings and high ray tracing in this one. It can go up to ultra, but that's a bit too stuttery for my taste. Okay, anyway, let's keep on going here. Get out of Hogsmeade, the stuttery fest of an area, and try to play the game smoothly outside of here. Honestly, it's still not too bad. I think the frame generation kind of masks the 1% lows pretty decently, but you can still notice that there is some micro stuttering happening. It's not as bad as if you were using no frame generation, by the way. Also, if I bring up the super resolution model override here, you can see that it's not utilizing DLSS 4.5 because ray reconstruction is turned on. If we disable that, we can use the preset M, which is DLSS 4.5. Once again, that makes it look worse in this game. You can see the vegetation is just blending in together. Very weird. I'm not a fan here. I prefer the 4.0 actually, so do not override DLSS in this one. It's super blurry around here as well. That is not what usually happens with DLSS 4.5, but I just thought I'd bring this up because you might want to play this game with DLSS 4.5, and it's not a good idea. Just enable ray reconstruction, which will make it DLSS 4.0, and this looks a little bit better. It's a bit noisy, but at least it's not blending the grass leaves together. It's not super soft like it was previously. Honestly, guys, still not my cup of tea, looking at this vegetation here. Alright, standing still, it looks great though. But let's try it with DLSS on quality instead. So here we go, DLSS quality enabled. This should bump the FG to 6 times. Yep, there we go. So we got 6 times frame generation right now. Latency is actually not too bad at around 50 to 60 milliseconds. So it still feels pretty responsive here. Around here, flying really fast, we got 200 plus frames per second. I was going to say frame generation. Damn, it's a lot of things, guys. This video is going to be huge, by the way. And it starts dropping into the 100. So artifacting will probably be noticeable, guys, with 6 times, because even with 4 times it would be noticeable, honestly. So we need to lower down the settings or target a lower frame rate in this one. I think targeting a lower frame rate is the best idea in course of action. But honestly, I'm not sure if it's because, well, we're riding fast. We're riding this broom fast, but things aren't really moving by as super fast, right? So it's not falling apart. It's not adding a ton of artifacting like we've seen in Cyberpunk. Maybe if I do this. Nope, not even then. With those effects on screen, I can't see any artifacting. Again, it's not ideal to play with 6 times FG all of the time. This is more meant for super demanding scenarios where it drops frame rates like crazy, then it goes up to 6 times and it stays stable in terms of frame rates, but this is not bad, honestly speaking. Like, what the heck? I was not expecting this. But let's remove the preset M here because it was just way too soft. And utilize the... Come on, there we go. 120 Hertz or 120 FPS target. Maybe 144 would be better. You know what? Let's do 144. 144 FPS target. All right, so I'm seeing that the 1% lows are definitely quite a bit lower than they were with targeting 240 frames per second, guys, around here in Hogsmeade. And you can see bigger frame time spikes there in the graph as well. Again, this is just the stuttering that comes with Hogwarts Legacy's use of Unreal Engine 4. Coupled with ray tracing as well, because RT in this game does introduce quite a lot of stuttering as well, unfortunately. But as you can see, for 144 FPS target, it stays at like 3 times FG most of the time. In terms of the vegetation here, stability of vegetation looks quite a bit better as well. Like this top part of these bushes, which just disappear when we walk right into them. It blends in with each other. It's a little bit noisy and fuzzy when I'm running like this, but the bottom parts actually are looking crisp. So 3 times seems like a good sweet spot so far in every game that we played, actually. 3 or 4 times in Grey Zone Warfare, 4 times was actually a little bit better, in my opinion. And yeah, flying around like this, I couldn't really see much artifacting with 6 times, so obviously with 3 times it's going to be pretty negligible when it comes to that. Alright, what about the baseline FPS, by the way, in this one? Right now, gonna turn it off. Oh, it requires a restart, but does it? Actually, no, it doesn't. Why do you require a restart if you don't require a restart? But yeah, it's between 50 and 60 FPS. A little bit lower than what I was expecting, considering this is UE4, once again. I actually thought it was going to deliver a higher frame rate baseline, you know, but it's just the ray tracing stuff. It's super demanding in this game. Okay, lastly, I was going to play a bit of God of War Ragnarok, but that's another single-player title that should be running pretty well, and it does run pretty well with the multi-frame generation stuff. So I want to try this UE5 game, Borderlands 4. Alright, this is really terribly optimized, as I'm sure you're aware of. And it's probably a good use of the dynamic frame generation. Let's target, since it's so intensive, let's target 120 FPS here. And over here on the super resolution, let's do preset M, because preset K, or DLSS 4.0, was delivering a lot of ghosting in this game the last time that I played it. Alright guys, here we have it. Borderlands 4. With dynamic frame generation turned on, it's only using 2 times to achieve 100-ish frames per second. Not even 3 times. So that's not half bad, actually. I wish we could have closer to those 120 FPS, so I guess we're gonna do balanced DLSS here. By the way, this is 4K resolution with high settings preset, not very high or badass, because this game runs terribly on those. And DLSS set to balance right now, and frame generation turned on, of course. And now we should be seeing a little bit higher FPS with balanced preset. Yes, there we go. Instead of 105, we're getting 110, 115 frames. It's a little bit smoother. Latency is probably slightly lower, although pretty much the same thing here from what I'm seeing. And I mean, is this that different compared to just using frame generation 2 times out of the box without needing to mess around with the Nvidia app and dynamic stuff? And the answer is not really. I mean, if you get to an area where it drops drastically in performance, it won't drop if you're using dynamic frame generation. It will just adjust the frame generation number there, the times 2, times 3, times 4, whatever it needs to keep and sustain the frame rates that you have targeted, or close to the FPS that you are getting most of the time. And that's actually pretty good technology, but will it transform the way you play your games? Like, is it as transformative as like multi-frame generation or FG2 times was with a 40 series? Not really. So if you have a 40 series GPU, you're still going to be fine with 2 times FG in your games, in my opinion. Like, this is not a reason to upgrade if you have a 40 series GPU, in my opinion. It's a nice to have, though. It will make your games slightly more stable, you know? But it's not going to transform your experience all of a sudden. I'm not sure what other people are saying about this technology. I do like it, and I think it makes sense in some other titles maybe that are a bit more inconsistent, but from the 5 games that we tried here today, in a couple of them we did see that dynamic stuff moving quite a lot, you know, to like 5 times, 4 times, 6 times at times, like Cyberpunk 2077, but in most of them it just stays stable. Like in this one, it still hasn't moved from 2 times, as far as I'm aware. So there's that, guys. Maybe we can increase the settings a little bit here. Check it out with a higher dynamic value there. I guess it also helps those people who just want to get the target FPS and forget about it. You know, like those people who aren't tinkering with your settings all of the time. They just want to play a game at a fixed 200 FPS target or 144 FPS target and call it a day. Then this makes a lot of sense, you know? You just have that peace of mind, that ease of mind that it's never going to drop drastically from the frame rate that you target. So in that scenario, it makes a lot of sense. And in games where cutscenes can drop a ton of FPS, it also makes a lot of sense. And it's a good use case for this dynamic frame generation stuff. Also, in terms of artifacting here with now 3 times dynamic frame generation enabled at the moment, I'm not really seeing anything weird happening. It actually looks really good, but this weapon right here, this is the one that usually brings a lot of trouble, and you can see it already. Look at the sight on the weapon. Super blurry right there. Look at this. And this is with DLSS 4.5 as well. It's just... I don't know why this specific weapon does this. This one also doesn't have any problems. This one just gets wrecked completely. It's funny. But anyway, guys, I think that's about it for this video. I think I have told you my thoughts on frame generation, or dynamic frame generation here, and frame generation as well. I mean, this was playing around with frame generation a lot in this video as well, not only the dynamic stuff. It's pretty cool tech. I like it. I like to see these little things being implemented and improved over time. I hope to see other brands of GPUs considering doing something similar as well, because it's always nice to have more options. Thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next one very soon. As always, love you all. Bye-bye.